Kahneman is he's like a god in psychology because he's the only psychologist ever to have won a Nobel Prize.
In economics?
Yeah, and that's the insane part. He won it in there's no Nobel Prize in psychology.
Right.
So he was so good at psychology, an entirely different field decided he was also the best at what they did. That's insane.
If Jordan played baseball and was good at it.
That's why Kahneman's why I feel like Jordan isn't the GOAT. Because 6 NBA championships. When was he ever so good at basketball he won the Super Bowl?
Yeah, never. Well, I'm sure he won some bets on it.
Other one of my friends in grad school, one day I walked into the lab late night, and he had hooked his head up to the oscilloscope.
Oh, yeah.
He had made a homemade EEG.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Are a lot of people
When my roommate does that.
I didn't know. You guys are maybe the only two people I've ever met that both study the human brain, and mind. Is there a lot of people doing this?
Neuroscience is a hot field right now, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is obviously because over the last 10 years or so, I've been seeing books on getting interested in it a little bit, and
The technology's gotten a lot better over time for people to
100%.
look inside the brain and see what's happening in there.
That's amazing. I was just seeing something that where they can map out or pull out the visual the people's dreams and sort of show.
Right. Yeah.
Is that how?
I never
understand.
read those papers, so I don't know how good the press coverage was of it, but that's I was reading those headlines too.
That seems
I have not
crazy
seen
to me.
those.
They can scan your dreams?
Somehow through which doesn't make any sense that they could through the sensors in the brain recognize the images that it's pulling up in your mind and project them onto a screen. That
seems pretty far-fetched, but
Yeah, that
there's a
doesn't
lot
sound
that I
right.
don't know. But I could see where you could maybe through repetition have correlations between this set of activity, this pattern would represent something.
Or like a nightmare or
if you were
something.
making notes of your dreams, and then they could then instead predict what you dreamt just by looking at the patterns based off of similar patterns.
Right,
So
okay.
maybe that's more of it. But this is coming from a lot of ignorance.
Well, same here.
Makes more sense.
I'm glad to hear that it's not, because it makes no sense to me that through wires they could then grab an image. That makes zero sense.
I feel like we're not that close to total recall.
Yeah. Because I've been reading over the last 10, 15 years, they're mapping the human brain and all the stuff they're trying to learn about, in order to sort of upload our consciousness or to do that kind of,
Well, I just met a guy at the bar that had he does 3D printing with metals, which I didn't even know was a thing.
Yeah,
right.
that's
And he's
awesome.
explaining
that's
it
just
to me.
welding.
And one of the use cases is
What'd you say?
I thought that was just welding. I don't know. I guess if you have a thing to it.
Well,
It's engraving.
I mean, he was showing me some incredible things that they create, and some of it is can be really cool art, just instead of with the plastics, but he can make a workable metal adjustable wrench, that sort of thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
And you can just
sweet.
print that and make that work. But he said one of the use cases is that they can make very delicate arrays that are far more sophisticated that would stimulate the brain. And so back when I was in grad school, was a while ago, they had kind of like an artificial retina for people that were unable to see, and just with a photo array you could see light dark and then project that to the occipital lobe, to your visual cortex, and you wouldn't be able to recreate the exact image, but you could recreate shapes and shadows and that sort of thing.
Would the brain then fill that in based on the other eye seen? Would the brain then, it already fills in a lot of stuff?
Well, if you wouldn't undergo that if you had vision in one eye. I think that would probably be sufficient. But if you had a retinal issue in both eyes, you could restore your vision through that kind of.
I feel like if I only had one eye, I'd go ahead and do it, and so they could start mapping it and learn how it works, and then it would help to get the product better for the next guy. You know what I'm saying? For the guy that needs two.
Yeah, though I don't know how the one eye would help the other, honestly. Oh. But because I think what is essentially kind of what I was taking away from what that guy was saying is that you can be far more precise on the visual, on the photo sensors, and then far more precise on how you're stimulating visual cortex. And there's pretty fantastic research around, what happens in visual cortex when you see something. So they're just kind of replicating that artificially.
Okay.
Which is pretty amazing. So you can see movement, for example. You don't have to. It's not just a static picture. You can see something move from visual space right to left and things like that. Very cool.
Huh.
What do you think of that, Tom?
I don't know what to think. It's like when I read this book. It's like I read that whole book, and I'm like, I don't really know what I read there. I mean, I get it, but I don't. But I feel like it's above me. Yeah, I feel like so. It's
What book are you talking about for
this
the
book.
folks at home?
The book, this book called Noise. It's about human judgment.
That's cool. When did that come out?
Daniel Kahneman. I don't know. I think
Not familiar with
recently
that, yeah.
because it's the book you see like when I go into a bookstore. It's
yeah.
like the new.
Gotcha.
It's the one that gets left on the
Daniel
beach.
Kahneman.
Yeah. So what do you? This guy is. How would you describe this?
Kahneman's great. Kahneman is he's like a god in psychology because he's the only psychologist ever to have won a Nobel Prize.
In economics,
Yeah, and that's the insane part. He won it there's no Nobel Prize in psychology.
right?
So he was so good at psychology, an entirely different field decided he was also the best at what they did. That's insane.
if Jordan played baseball and was good
That's
at
the
it.
thing. That's why Kahneman's why I feel like Jordan isn't the GOAT. Because, 6 NBA championships. But when was he ever so good at basketball he won the Super Bowl?
Yeah, never. Well, I'm sure he won some bets on it. 21.
Well, most
So
certainly.
Kahneman's, he's
I just
good.
learned that to be nominated for the Peace Prize, you just need somebody in a government position or a professor to nominate you. Doesn't necessarily because there was a statement given by Nobel because some people were nominated that they're like,
Oh, yeah, crazy people get nominated
they're
all the
like,
time.
yeah,
Harambe.
nah.
Yeah.
But the statement was just because you're nominated doesn't mean that. But it is cool to know that I'm like 1 degree from a nomination, EJ.
Yeah.
Put that
Nobel
on
Peace
my
Prize nominee,
comedy
yeah.
bio.
It's weird that Yasser Arafat has a Nobel Prize and Gandhi doesn't.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah, I don't even know if Gandhi's been nominated or something. So it's some weird thing like that where people like that have won and he hasn't even been nominated. Yeah. So this guy has he had another book I read a long time ago about, that's the book that, like, I think that might be what
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah. And that one, I don't know exactly, I can't remember all that it was about. Like, I have these things, like I'm saying to you, that they come from those kind of books. But basically my thought is most of the decisions we make are wrong.
There's a lot of
or
a lot of biases, a lot of flaws, a lot of noise.
yes.
Yeah.
So I didn't know. So that's what he's saying in this is that
Yeah.
the two things that really affect our decision making are bias and noise. And bias, we all know, even when we don't recognize we have it, we have. And then the noise is like it. The way he's writing about it's like that wasn't a thing that people really thought about much.
Yeah, I'm so curious now. What does he attribute the noise to?
Well, some of the examples that I remember are from this are like it's crazy stuff. Like some of it comes from old studies that like the guy named Frankel did on judges, and their biases and stuff. And it was early on in the prison system and in sentencing and stuff like that. And it sort of changed some of that.
They had bias back
Well,
then.
Well, there's
definitely
still
a lot of biases there.
There still is a ton of bias, and then the noise is things like the decisions people will make on things like before lunch. They give bigger sentences, or they make different medical
They'll get
decisions.
Fatigued in there.
Yeah, just the kind of the luck of the draw of when that decision is being made versus what's happening in that
Just coming from the situation,
microenvironment.
Things-
So like the one example that I saw briefly on, and I think it is in the book, is 2 students are applying for college. One is accepted and one is not, and they had equal. They should have had equal chances of getting in. And for one, right after the interview, it rained, and as it turns out, that apparently there's been some studies on whether on what might affect somebody selecting a student versus not. And sunny days, they value certain things greater than on rainy days. And on rainy day, so that candidate would have gotten extra points for having these qualities on the rainy day. And so it was a
Right.
rainy day quality. And if you're a rainy day quality or candidate and you're not seen on a rainy day, you'll be measured lower.
So like if you come in without an umbrella, they're like, this fucking bum.
And it affects sentencing. It affects things like that.
big
It affects
stuff, yeah.
it affects judgment by doctors. It affects all of our decision making. Things we do. Like another example was if your baseball team if your sports team won that night before, they would make different decisions based on those kind of things. Right. Things like that we don't even realize. Our moods and our feelings affect our decision making.
Yeah, I remember going into a job interview and the guy was pissed because he got pulled over.
You're not getting that job,
and I was like,
unless you can get him out of a ticket.
Well, he was so agitated and so mad that I wasn't thinking about it within the context of this book, obviously, but I was like, I got to calm this guy down for a little while before we start talking. So there was a fair amount of like what I tried to do was just distract him for the first 15 minutes and get him to smile or laugh or do something else and then we got down to business. So
yeah, you have to let that whole run through him.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but you knew that maybe if it's depending on the job. That would really help. It's like that's exactly what we needed. We were looking for somebody who knew how to manipulate minds.
I did get the job offer. I did not take that job, but I did get the job offer.
So he defines noise as he says we have defined noise as undesirable variability in judgments of the same problem.
Yeah.
I guess that's what we were just saying.
Yeah.
So
okay. Yeah.
And so
there's a lot of noise.
Yeah, it's even in things like I just saw an interview that with Jeff Bezos where he talked about how he always speaks last in his meetings and stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things he talks about is why is they talk about in this book, which is that if he speaks first, then if you were going to have a great idea and it was a little bit different than that, now you're going to not voice your idea because you're going to want to agree with this. So that noise influences how you really believe.
You
probably know what the name of this phenomenon is, but there's a phenomenon where a group of people that are perfectly competent can make the exact wrong decision just based off of what I think you're expecting from me. And
yes, he talks about that in here in fingerprint analysis, which you think is exact.
Yeah.
And it's not. Like if you're coming to me as the detective and you're like, we got this guy, here's his finger, we know they're on, and then there's a better chance that I'm going to find those fingerprints to match, which I thought it was just an exact science that you did. But
I imagine it's probably getting more automated and more analytics from a computer and the image itself versus.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it was recognizing a whorl and measuring, between lines and that sort of thing, and that you could let your. I'm not sure if that would be bias or noise in that case, but I imagine it would be more like bias in my mind.
Okay.
But you could be like, yeah, well, it's Tom. Of course, Tom always brings me the right guy. So
yeah, that's bias, probably. Yes.
Yeah, this idea of noise reminds me of there's this paper that came out like 5 years ago. It's a meta-science paper on like how we do science, and it's called Many Analysts, One Data Set. And yeah, which you publish a serious paper, you want to conjure images of Two Girls, One Cup for sure.
That did not conjure in me.
It did not conjure. No,
okay.
no,
you're chuckling. And
your TikTok feed looks different than mine.
My chuckle was more from a scientific of, oh yeah, I could see that being problematic. So
okay.
I was with you, AJ.
Okay.
Thank
For
you.
the
All
record
right.
camera. Yeah.
But yeah, many analysts, one data set. What they do, they have this research question. They ask people to just test this hypothesis. They're testing for like racism in sports.
Right.
This is like an old idea, and they're specifically looking at like whether refs are more likely to penalize like dark-skinned players than light-skinned players.
I bet they are.
Colorism, and they definitely. I'm pretty sure they are. There's like a lot of research on this, but they. It was a couple dozen different research teams. They gave them all the exact same data set. Like here, we recorded across a bunch of games, who the players were and where the penalties were and everything. And these are like highly trained teams, no skin in the game at all. doing. This is like the one place you'd expect, all right, I mean, if this is where objectivity is, we can
Right,
get rid of
right.
our biases. We're all PhDs are trained in like how to objectively evaluate, evidence, and their results were all over the place. Like I think 69% of them found a significant relationship, 31% didn't, and the effect sizes were all over the place. It was like it was so messy.
Well, some of that might actually just be because I'm not sure what that data set looked like, but there still can be lots of variables in there. So
it's a complex data set.
So what you end up focusing on might be different. So like even in well-controlled chemistry experiments, there can be dozens of variables, and you can only control for so many. And or things that you might not have thought, like humidity or something, you might not have thought of that being such a big.
Well, they all have the same numbers, so they're all making different decisions about what to control for and what.
He talks
what
about
counts,
in
what
here
doesn't
like
count.
the wisdom of crowds and the dumbness of crowd. Like the wisdom of crowds in collecting data or making or in decision making is they will be all over the place.
Yeah.
But the mean will end up being really close to what
Right,
the truth
yeah.
is, right? Whatever
Right.
that is will be, but crowds themselves make terrible decisions because of things like whoever's the loudest and the most and has the most leadery.
Yeah.
You start to influence the things that happen,
Right.
and the decisions that get made based on
Yeah.
like now it's about a feeling as opposed to
Yeah. When
what
you can
people really
leverage
think.
the independent ideas of
Yes.
a group, they are wise when you bring the information together. But yeah, when they're influencing each other and like acting as a unit, then that's
that's what he means
Mob
about that's what he
mentality.
means about the last. I think what Bezos means about being the last one to
Totally.
speak, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it stops.
groupthink is real ugly. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're thinking as a group.
Yeah, for when it gets to like decision making, so first of all, there's a bunch of things that you don't necessarily decide, but you decide. I don't know how to say that, but like I'll make fun of my dog for going into and eating the cat food, which makes him sick again and again and again. And I'll be like, what a dumb animal, as I'm eating another donut and another donut. Like he doesn't eat right. He's making himself sick. Like there's things that like you don't even realize the decision to do that and the impact. Like so we definitely have a bias for our own decision making. We think that we get it. Everybody thinks they're a little smarter than they are. Everybody thinks they're a little more honest than they are. And so that concept takes me to like this thing that I heard on NPR some time ago, and I never looked up the article, but they were looking at people who, so certain states have opt-in for organ donation and certain states have opt-out. And well understood that if you have opt-in, that organ donation is lower. So if someone has to make the effort to say, yes, I want to do it, then essentially the default pathway of doing nothing is the more common choice.
So states have switched to
So if you have opt-out, there'll be more organ donation, and if you have opt-in, there'll be less. Nonetheless, when you ask people after the fact why they chose that, they will have a justification for it, being like, oh, well, it's important. So they've justified it after the decision was kind of made for them, because otherwise you'd expect that number to be equal no matter what if they were really thinking about it.
Really?
But
why, and on something like that, the numbers would be equal?
Because I think there's a human phenomenon where you're justifying it after the decision was made.
Yeah,
so
right,
you're
of course.
essentially you're like, it's easier not to check the box, right? Whatever that is. And then after the fact, if it's not donating, well, I don't know, you justify it for spiritual reasons, or you justify it for like how much use is it actually going to be, or this anecdote that sticks in your head for one reason. But then if on the other hand you're in a state where it's an opt-out and you've done it, then people are reporting, well, it's important to support science and healthcare, and if my organs can do something.
So it's
and
kind of
People
like,
have
you go ahead, AJ.
Oh, people do have a strong sense that they have arrived at their decisions through this like really thoughtful
But
process,
mostly we haven't, right?
But mostly we haven't. Yeah, we're very influenced by the situation, and we're doing it sort of unconsciously or habitually. But then when
Why?
asked about it,
How-
we feel like we chose that, and we are good at explaining and coming up with good reasons for why.
How is that a benefit to us, evolutionary wise, and for
I-
our mind to
Yeah.
justify our poor
Well, there are
decisions and to
there are
continue to
theories
make
about
them?
that, which is it allows you to explain and justify so that you aren't like, especially if you do anything that's sort of selfish that other people don't like, then you can
Fit it.
explain your behavior so you don't get like punished for it or
Okay.
it's also there are theories that our intellect is not for like arriving at things but for explaining our behaviors, justifying our behaviors to others, and then also like getting people to agree with us. So we're just kind of like coming up with reasons that seem good and that
It seems
think
like
we'll sway
it's a
people.
different end of the spectrum of lying. So whether you're lying to yourself or lying to
Right.
someone else.
Yeah. Why is that built in, and there's not an honesty mode that's at all times? Why is it? I don't understand that. I don't understand why
If
that's
we're honest,
our
we'll get
default
punished.
setting on our brains
If
is
we're
to
honest,
make shit
and
up.
also potentially punished by yourself, right? So like we're all comics, so we've all beat ourselves up over a bad night unnecessarily, right? So a bad decision, you could be beating yourself. So it could also be
Yeah.
to sleep at night.
Dude, sometimes I'm driving down the
True.
road and a bad decision I made 30 years ago pops into my head, and I'm like, "What was I thinking?" You know what I mean? And then
Or he calls you on the phone, or better, like, she calls you. On
I
the
really,
phone.
I don't know why you said he there. It made me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's this funny study on people explaining their decisions where they, real simple study, they have people just sit down and like they're shown two pictures, two portraits, two faces. They just have to pick which one they like more. And they're sort of matched on attractiveness. But they do this like 30 times. Real simple. You're shown two pictures, you point at the one you like more, and then they'll slide the picture over to you. You pick it up and just explain why you picked that person. So they do it over and over again. But what the participants don't know is the researcher that's sitting across from the table from them, they're trained in sleight of hand. So in like a subset of the trials, they'll actually slide over the other picture that they didn't pick.
Okay.
And there are a couple of interesting findings from that. One is afterwards they ask people, they probe them, almost never are they noticing that they're being handed the other picture that they didn't pick.
Really?
And then nevertheless, and then if you look at people's explanations, for explanations of pictures they did pick versus ones they didn't pick, no difference. They come just as quickly, they're just as detailed, they're just as confident in their reasons for why they picked that picture.
Which
That's scary.
Which to me means that like this noise and the bias and stuff gets justified after the fact in such a way that I think, I think it can help explain some of the political discourse and some of the trenches that people are in, because once you
decide where side you're on,
something, it takes a lot of energy to go back and say, you know what,
I was wrong.
I was wrong. And so you're far more likely to defend who you voted for or what decision you made in the past.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
This, I forgot what I was going to say about this. But
No, but that thing where it's like if you could opt in or opt out of the organ donation thing, it feels like to me it would be like a question. It's like the way the question is asked, like, oh, do you want to save someone? And then you could be like, someone else probably will. And then the other one's like, do you want people to fucking die? And it's like, well, no. So it's like weird how we rationalize like
Yeah,
that.
Kahneman has a lot of research on that. That's what he won his Nobel Prize for, is like little framing things like that. And
yeah.
yeah, all these
That's-
quirks in decision making.
So does that this whole book to me in a way makes it makes an argument for using algorithms to make
Right,
a lot of our
totally.
decisions. It's like all the people that are worried about the algorithms making the choices and worrying about AI. So, but we'll all, because of that thing that we have of like, I agree, people make terrible decisions, not except for me. Mine are good. You know what I'm saying? So, would you, if you had that ability, turn a lot of your decision making over to the algorithm, or both of you knowing how the mind is, or would you still resist? Nah, I trust myself.
It depends on what, and I'm not sure. When you say a lot of decisions are bad, I would just argue that a lot of decisions are not optimal, and that
Okay.
I mean, if you make a decision and it kills you, clearly bad. But, you know, I had a choice between two jobs. I think I chose less optimally, but I still got benefit from that. You know, I got paid for a little bit. I got experiences that I wouldn't have gotten in that other job. You know, every decision to whatever you do in the past has led you to the point that you're at, and you know, you could have regrets or wonder what would have changed, but you know, I'm not sure any of those decisions were necessarily horrible bad decisions, just not optimal.
Yeah, but bad might be a poor choice of words.
Bad choice.
Yes, that's what I started to say.
It was a bad choice to say bad choice.
That's what I went with poor. So you're not answering that question.
So I think it depends, because I think a lot of things fall into the category of you know, it's not going to kill me. It doesn't really matter so much, and then there are others, and in which case, why not retain the right, you know, the right to choose for myself.
Okay.
And then there are other things that, like, there's a lot of cool technology around, like AI for reading images in healthcare, for example. And I'm all for that because
you're not in healthcare.
but like the idea that you could detect something that a human eye might miss, right? I don't mind those being run in parallel, but I would rather have an algorithm kind of pointing through things. I think there's a lot in healthcare.
Because that doctor's team may have lost last night and it's a rainy day, and
Correct.
now you don't know what decision
Correct.
he's going to make.
And it's also possible that
make.
that image has two bits of news in it. The one that they're looking for and something that they're not. And a computer doesn't care, right? It would look at that image and say, all right, oh, it looks like there's two things going on. One's good, one's bad, or something like that.
Okay.
Right? So, you know, I think there are going to be really good uses for algorithms to say, yeah, you know, we think this.
Yeah, I just can't imagine they're going to use it. It's like James had to take his wife to the hospital the other night, and they left from like one of those aftercare places. And like, you got to go to the emergency room. It's like you got to get there, walk in, start filling out the paperwork, and get in line. Like, there's an app that you can order your cheeseburger at Wendy's, so it's waiting for you. You can't forward ahead, or the doctors can't communicate.
Right.
Like, now we're going to have computers picking our cancers for us as we walk through a scanner. I just don't buy it. They can't, you know, it doesn't. It seems like it's not. We're not moving towards more efficient.
Healthcare is a strange thing because you have a bunch of, you know, educated people, but they're humans, and then you have that group mentality thing that we were talking about. And then individuals within that that have their own biases that are clearly, you know, pro them, right? So that's why I think in this country we do a lot of unnecessary tests, because the people are like, I want answers, and they're like, I want that. Whereas if you had better decision making to show that, given your specific set of circumstances and these things that we know about you, we know doing this and this and this is just wasting your time.
Right.
It should lead to better outcomes for that person, but also should have, you know, health economic.
I think it will. I think you're right. I think that's going to ultimately be. People will start to turn their decisions over to those things, especially in stuff. What about in sentencing? Because that's another thing that they talk about a lot in this book. Is sentencing is so all over the place, you know, and then they're like, well, if we have specific, there's a lot of resistance by everybody to have like exact penalties for crimes.
Yeah.
So there's like, there has to be a window.
Right. Yeah, I'm pro algorithm with that stuff. I'm pro algorithm if we know what the algorithm is, if we know what the rules are.
If you're going to sentencing, would you rather the algorithm do it or the judge do it? Would you rather?
For sure, if we know what the algorithm is. I mean, when we make decisions like in our department to like hire and admit grad students or whatever, like we try to use a formula.
Right.
But we are setting the rules, and then that's like, it's good because we're psychologists. We know we want to avoid bias and want to avoid noise. If we're talking about AI is biased, and we don't know how AI thinks.
Right, that's true. That's true.
And also the algorithm is limited to what you set it up to be. So you have those two things that are, I think, in contrast to each other, right? So you want to be controlled. You want to be precise and with your decisions.
Maybe I'm not using the right word.
No, I think-
You're going to use math. There's somehow math is going to be involved in this,
Yeah.
instead of relying totally on
Algorithm's
human
real
judgment.
simple to me. Algorithm is just, these are the rules, these are the parameters. I could do it in an Excel spreadsheet. We'll just score one of these things, and we'll have these real specific criteria.
How do you set them up? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, how do you pick your how you guys are setting those up and what the formula is going to be?
We could have like, okay, every job candidate, we want them to be strong in these 7 attributes, and here's specifically how we're going to rate them on these 7 attributes. Here are the criteria for like a 1 versus a 5 and whatever. And we have a formula.
And they value
And real
different
easy.
characteristics
We do
more
that,
than
yeah.
others. So if I got a 4 and 1 and a 7 is my
Right, and then we decide how important is each attribute, and we weight it. We have
Right.
like an equation, real simple. I love an algorithm like that, because now I'm not influenced by like outside stuff.
Although even in that example, it's
Yeah.
complex, right? Because there's going to be like there's a candidate, and you want to look at the number of publications or something, right? You could actually go look at the number,
Right.
and then you probably could, in a pretty objective way, even look at the quality of those, right?
For sure. Yeah.
But there's going to be things that, even if it's in your algorithm, are going to be rather subjective.
Yeah.
Like, how well are they going to fit in with the rest of the
Right.
faculty?
Right.
You know, that kind
For
of
sure.
thing. And then
Still
there's
complicated.
And then
There's
there's
still some room to,
And then there's the 10 items that you either didn't think of or didn't think were important enough that still also have an impact. So it is tricky. But to EJ's point, an algorithm is just going to be what you program.
what you set it up to be.
But there are, like in this, he's talking about the MSE, which is it's a formula, the mean squared error, that thing, like And they and what you're talking about the different evaluations and having the 7 characteristics, that he uses an example of that in here too, talking about methods for eliminating bias,
Right.
I mean, there's stuff that's not
the
quite.
squares method, the least squares method. Do you know about that? Mm-hmm. What is that?
I don't know if I can explain it, but
It's the standard way to evaluate errors whenever achieving accuracy is the goal.
Yeah. So.
yeah, you're comparing signal to noise, and that's one way of capturing the noise.
Okay, so noise you've already known about before. It's not.
Well, in
this is-
statistics, yeah, we do. When we're like evaluating our results, we decide, okay, there's like a difference between the treatment group and the control group, but is that just sampling error? Is that just noise, or is this actual signal that's supporting our hypothesis or suggesting this treatment's? You're always comparing signal to noise.
Okay, he's making. I somehow
Calling
get the
something
impression.
significant or not.
Okay, I don't know if he's just arguing then that, because I thought he was kind of coining this thing about noise, but that's sort of something that's
It's pretty
existed.
standard, yeah.
I think but then what
Stats.
he's saying is how people weren't really sure it's how much of an influence it is. Like it's pretty drastic, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Bias plus noise equals the overall error. It's the math. I don't know if this is. I'm just sort of skimming through stuff I underlined as I went, and I was
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
I didn't really
that
get
makes
this.
sense in like in making an optimal decision. Like if you wanted to be true Vulcans and make a non-biased, logical decision based off of everything that you know, it would be that exact equation. You're right. You subtract out the bias, subtract out any of the error, and you get to optimal decisions. And you can do that with computers, except their computers end up, and the algorithms that you do are programmed by people, which are flawed, and then you have the self-learning piece of it. And there's different kinds of, there's things that fall short from like AI that are hugely useful to be tools for people, like machine learning, which is not AI, but where you don't necessarily say, you give it a data set and you say, hey, can you find any patterns in there? And then the output will be, here are the patterns that we see. And then you can have smart people look at that data and go, oh, I think that might be important. And then but that's not the end of it at that point, right? That's just the beginning of another set of experiments, and you test whether that's important or not. But that's, we used to use that for clinical trial data, where you could, without having to know what flaws there might be in the data, you could find people that were cheating the system, like that. You can always program these edit checks to look at this specific phenomenon, or you can let the computer figure out the rules and do the test itself. So like for an example, in a trial, we learned through this that, and I would have never thought of this, but there was 2 people that signed up for the same clinical trial to get the money, and only by showing that if you line up all of this person's data, which came in at name 1, and all of this other person's data that came in at name 2, they were exactly the same. Well, not exactly. There was some variation, but the variation was too small for it to be likely that those were not 2 separate individuals.
Really?
And then sure enough,
Wow.
it was the same person. And like you can program and look for that, or you can have the machine learning kind of highlight it to you. My friend Eric used
So there's a data fingerprint that each person will kind of have about.
well,
how they,
on your measurements, right?
Right.
So if you go in on if your weight is this and your blood pressure is this and your lab values are this, and then that's going to give you a little bit of a fingerprint for the next one and the next one. And so if they change too much from visit to visit, or in this case, the sites were just like 20 miles apart, so he'd go to one and then he'd go to the other, and they were able to spot it. But they can do this. Like we would use like wearables, like a Fitbit or something like that, to match activity, and you get a fingerprint from your activity, both in like your gait, and there's certain things, so that it would protect from me being like, hey, EJ, will you wear it for a couple days? I'm going to take it easy on the couch.
Oh, yeah.
And you'd be able to see the kind of the...
Can I do that with like an ankle bracelet too, like from the police? Can somebody just wear it for me?
It depends on what they measure. But I
Yeah.
think that's just location, I think. I have no direct experience with the ankle bracelets.
So yeah, so you could like strap your Fitbit to your dog and let it walk around.
People did that. People
How
did
desperate
that
are you to lie to yourself? You know what I mean? It's your thing. It's an eye watch.
Yeah, a couple examples, and they might not be real, but a couple of examples of people doing that were to win, like where it would be like a company was saying, hey, if you get at least 100,000 steps this month or something like that. Well, maybe that's not that.
Yeah.
But if you could get to the certain
That's like
level,
going to get the mail one time.
yeah.
I think so one of these books too I've read before, or one of these futurist books, kind of based on wearables, like being able to judge your blood pressure and all these things that it could supposedly tap into, that's running through your system. Like some of the stuff you're talking about, measuring the electrical charge, all that stuff, like to where it could be sort of, it knows what music changes that, or it knows. What kind of what coming up on your television would do, and it would start to make some of those decisions for you. Like people repeatedly make the wrong decisions on people that would be good for them to date or to be with. And if you had a decision making thing that helped you make those better decisions in that. So would we use those or not use those? That's I think eventually we will, but I for me, I just think most people are going to resist that.
Yeah.
Like,
There are mathematical formulas, though, where they've analyzed what's the optimal choice theory for, like, who your partner is. Who
if
you
she can do
marry.
math, I don't want her.
The person doesn't have to do math, and this is from recollection, so it might be wrong. But like, if the optimal choice theory would be something along the lines of, you date. I think it was like double digits number of people, which would have gotten me out of the running altogether. But I think it's like you date 15 people, and no matter how good they seem, you don't take it. You don't choose any of them. And then once that is done, you take the best. That kind of helps you set the bar. And then you take the person that is above that bar, the first person that's above that bar after that, and that's to find compatible. It's something like that.
Yeah.
Huh. It's just fascinating to me how our minds I don't have no clue how our minds work, and you just think you do. It's so. And is that what got both of you guys interested in studying it in the first place? Like, do you remember the spark that was like, what the fuck? I want to learn about this.
I do, but it wasn't that.
It was on mushrooms or something.
The thing that got that.
Oh, there was probably a hot girl in a class or something. And you were like, "That's I want to go in there."
Hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened. But the thing that got me was of how we interact with the world and how we perceive it. And so I was really fascinated by the idea that, like, you know, you don't, I'm touching this couch, but I'm actually not touching anything, right? There's no atom of Steve that's touching any atom of the couch. The closer you get, the more they get repelled. So you get these sensations.
What do you mean? I'm touching this right here, right?
No, yeah. There's no.
If I'm
there's
Tom,
there's
you know
no
what I'm
Tom atoms that are touched, because the second no two atoms can occupy the same space, and you can't even bump two atoms together. They repel each other. So what you feel is the pressure pushed back into your receptors on your finger when you're touching something like that.
Huh.
And when you hear something, it's your auditory system representing a sound, just vibration in the air. When you see something, it's your visual cortex and you understanding light versus dark and color, and you're getting various attributes of the visual space. But it's first of all really repetitive, like repeatable. You're very good at it. Humans are very good about, but animals in general are very good at it. Plants are very good at it, of having things that they can sense and change. But like when you get to the human senses, you're talking about really precise, delicate, and sensitive things. So I won't remember the exact distance, but your rods and your retina can react to a single photon of light, which the distance, I think it's something like a candle at 3.
I can't even see these words without glasses.
That's a different problem. But you could detect without the blurriness that might affect it, and barring fog or anything like that. I think it's a candle at 3 foot, like 1,000 yards away, like 3 football fields away.
Wow.
You can see a candle that should represent a single photon, creating a signal that you can detect in your brain. And I was like, damn, that's really cool. And so I was very into like the signal transduction from that and perception as a whole. So that's what got me into it. And then I studied.
Does the speed of light slow down as it runs into things? Like as it goes in here and then into your brain and blah, blah, blah?
The speed of light stops the second the photon gets absorbed, and then it's working at the speed of your nervous system. So there's a rapid chemical reaction that happens inside. It starts at a G protein.
And the airbags are going
and
off.
Changes the electrical properties and sets off an electrochemical signal. So it's no longer it's not like electrons going down a wire even. It's an electrochemical signal that's action potential synapse, and that's going all the way to your brain. But that happens pretty quick, but there is a.
How do they figure that out? Like how do you?
Well, going back to why like neuroscience and psychology and
because that's why it's just like what I just asked.
It's booming because it's an area that there's a lot of room for better understanding, and with better technology, you can ask better questions. And
they just started. He just injected or put the Neuralink in somebody yesterday or the day before.
I heard that. Yeah.
Who did that?
Musk.
Elon Musk.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think the government said he couldn't, and then he did it anyway. The way he does, he's like, it's a stupid rule. I'm doing it. Like that's how rich you are. You have fuck you government money.
Yeah.
That's
God
crazy.
damn, what an idiot.
Would you guys do the Neuralink? What's your
I don't know.
I don't know
anything
enough about
this,
it actually.
Yeah.
I know that it's a thing. I know that it's an Elon Musk thing, but I don't know what it's really aiming to do. Or
Me neither.
Put ads in your brain, I guess. I don't know.
Probably. Eventually.
Yeah.
Ads. It's always ads in the end.
Yeah.
Visual perception is crazy because they're like, I talk about this in my classes. I think in the 70s, this sociologist wrote this insane book. They're just big on like everything's a social construct. and he wrote this book on blindness being a social construct.
Blindness?
Yeah, that blind people,
They
the
can
idea that
really see, they're just
the idea that
taking
they
it?
can't see, we're imposing that on them through our interact. It's a social construct.
What? Wait, whoa.
That's true, and I believe that.
What do you mean?
But I also believe that.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like, people that are blind aren't really blind. They're just being forced to think they're blind by everybody else?
Yeah, through people's social expectations that we're imposing on them.
That's insane. What do you mean?
Why do you
Yeah,
believe
we
that?
might have two different things going on. So there's
Like my buddy Daryl Lennox slowly went blind. Mm-hmm. He did get a lot of material out of it, so it'd kind of be like him to do that on purpose.
So here's the reason that, because I hadn't heard that before, but the reason I reacted the way I did is that there are people, and I remember seeing this in like the 80s on like That's Incredible or something like that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that
There
shit.
was a guy who was riding the bike and he was clicking. He was going,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
and I was like, and I don't know how old I was at the time when I watched it, like 12, but I was like,
You sure there wasn't just-
bullshit. Like that's total. Like this is he's not blind, or this is a gimmick. It's something learned. But there was I had, I was like, definitely not. But I learned more about it, and that's been carefully studied.
Yeah.
And so, kind of going back to some of the stuff we were talking about, visual cortex before, maybe before the recording, and I can't remember when we started, but they'll record. So people are essentially echolocating and seeing visual space through their auditory, through the sounds that they make and what they hear. And if you think that would be done in the hearing centers, no, they actually see the world, because when you do functional MRIs, where you see where the activity is, you can see that the activity is in the appropriate place in visual cortex. So they really are seeing the world through the sounds that they make. And like he was on one of the podcasts on NPR. And he was talking, and he was like kind of interacting with a new kid, because he's taught many people to do this at this point. I don't know how many, but many. And there was like a bunch of tough love in there. He's like, no, you got to figure it out, because essentially well-meaning people are making it so that you can't see, because they're providing the stuff that they're giving you the tools and the help that you need, so you don't have to compensate in any other way.
Yeah, this guy's real cool. I think you're talking about Daniel Kish.
Yes.
Yeah. What makes him special is his parents. When he was growing up, he became blind at a very early age. His parents just let him do whatever he wanted. He would climb trees. He'd be running outside, walking through the neighborhood as a blind kid. He'd run into stuff, but he'd figure it out.
Right.
And so, and he would, very naturally, he'd start to make this clicking sound, and he'd echolocate his way around his environment. And when he started school, he just walked to school like any other kid would walk to school. He learned how to ride his bike at the regular time. He'd walk himself to class. He was very capable. And then he tells a story about this other blind kid transferring into his elementary school who had a walking stick, who had to be led by the hand everywhere. He hated this kid. He would like bully and beat up this kid. He's like, what's wrong with you, you useless piece of crap?
Making
but
us
like,
look bad.
But because he got treated.
You're making us sound bad.
Yeah, he got treated the same way other blind kids get treated, which is like, oh, we got to. You start walking to the edge of the yard, like, no, don't, get on a bike. No, you can't do that. Climb the tree. No, sorry, you can't. It's too dangerous. And so this expectation that blind kids can't see the world or navigate their environments keep them from being able to do that. And also, a lot of blind kids naturally will start to make either a clicking sound or a shushing sound to just create sound, get some feedback from the environment, and they're told to not do that. They're told it's disruptive. They're like,
Oh, wow.
what's that sound you're making? Don't
stop
be
it.
quiet in this
It's
classroom.
annoying.
Yep.
But again, I'm a little confused on how that's visual and not auditory, because you're saying it's going in through their
It goes
optical
in through
nerve
their
and
ears.
their.
So, the way that they proved it, and I'm probably going to mess up some of the details of the study, but they essentially put microphones in each ear, little small microphones, because a lot of what happens in auditory space, if somebody makes a noise over there, I can tell, because there's a slight difference between how it hits this ear first versus this ear. And so they can't just record it in general. They have to record it ear by ear. And so they record they recorded them. I think it was a milk jug that they were swinging on a pendulum as they were making their echolocation sound. In this case, it was ticking the clicks, and they recorded that. And then what they did was they kind of changed from microphones to speakers, and put the person in the functional MRI machine, and you could see both auditory cortex light up, but also visual cortex. So they had compensated to say that when you hear this exact combination, that means that something not only is in visual space, but they could see it move because it was on a pendulum. They could see it move across the visual cortex in the appropriate way, which is just.
Do blind people see in their dreams?
I would expect the answer would be yes, but it might depend. But I would expect the answer is yes.
Would they see in the same way you're talking about,
But
hearing-wise, or would they see like images and stuff?
Well, now you get into a big philosophical thing, though. Like
because
there's no guarantee that you and I see the same thing. So
right.
So who's
Right.
to know?
What would be the context for them to have the visuals? And this is totally just off subject. Why do people with Alzheimer's and their brain sort of deteriorate in memory? Why does the brain then still remember to breathe and pump the heart? And why does that never happen, where the brain just starts forgetting to do some of the stuff it's supposed to do?
It's just which parts are degenerating, which parts are.
But it's the mind. Oh, it's just the specific
That's
parts of the
real
mind that are
deep down.
degenerating.
That's like brainstem stuff.
Yeah. So
Okay, but whatever's causing that plaque or whatever's building up to cause Alzheimer's, that stuff is not affecting
core
stuff?
bodily stuff, right? So you have.
Seems like there would be something doing that, though.
Yeah, I mean you'll hear people talk about like reptile brain and stuff like that, and that's kind of like hindbrain, which is like the body stuff, and then the midbrain doing like some of the kind of behavioral things. But then
that part of the brain doesn't deteriorate like the memory or other part. Or
yeah, I mean, I'm
parts?
sure there are situations where it does. You could have an exposure to something, and it's just affecting neurons in general. In which case, you're probably not going to survive or something like that. But those things are so kind of ingrained, and a lot of those things too, evolutionary, have to be really robust. In that they got to be tough because if there's anything that can foul up, like you can't get to reproduction age to pass your genes along if there's a mess up at that point. So I think those tend to be pretty robust, like systems in place.
Have blind people gotten mad about this guy saying, "Hey, we can see"? You guys are being too easy on the blind. Like the blind guy saying that. Does he get a lot of pushback from the blind community?
I'm not sure.
I don't know,
no
but
he's helped a lot of people. He has a whole organization where they teach people how to do echolocation, and their pictures. He'll be leading like a group of a bunch of them. They'll be like hiking. At the edge of a cliff. Literally, the blind leading the blind.
And they're like a
fine.
group of bats. They're just like, and then they get around like that.
And so
I must be really
podcast
confused when they go to like a village in Africa where that's like that means bring me water.
They're swearing at everybody.
with the Kung Bushman. Yeah.
That's very racist to me.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I love how I said probably. Maybe that's right.
It is a dialect that uses clicks, so I see the connection.
Yes, of course.
That's how that podcast started. It was the blind leading the sighted. I don't know if that's how you say that. But he was leading the person doing the podcast hiking on a trail that they've never been before.
Yeah, but I still have a hard time saying that.
Ducking under stuff and following a meandering trail. So I mean, they were going on a mountainous trail, I think in California.
I still have a hard time saying that that's seen.
Ultimately, vision is not what your eyes are doing; it's what your brain is doing. It's what your visual cortex is doing. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is what was so fascinating.
So if you went like that to him, he because he hears and visualizes that way, that he would would have a reflexive action.
They say the fidelity of the vision is like right here in your periphery, and but it's 360, which we don't have.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
yeah, to a certain extent, it's
Because
it's kind of
consciousness
It's
exists.
kind of Daredevil-esque.
Through it's like consciousness is aware, or it's
Well, I mean, your brain interprets what's going on there as visual space. So the fact that it's going on in that space,
That's nuts.
Which is why I was like going back to why I got into neurobiology back in the day. Like, what was so fascinating is like all of that is an artificial construct to represent the world, and in that case, it doesn't matter what the source of the data is. In that case, instead of it's replacing visual information with auditory information and coming to the same, well, similar at least, output to be able to see the environment, even though it's
yeah.
using different stuff.
I remember reading about they used these like dot matrix pin. You know those toys where you put your hand in it and the pins all move up or whatever.
Yeah.
They would install one of those on like people's backs, I think, or somewhere on their body where they're getting tactile input, but the input's coming from a camera that's either on your head or the back.
Yeah.
And after a while, it's very foreign, but after a while, your brain's able to translate that into just seeing the image that's being fed to you through these little pins on your skin. That's really cool. Yeah. And you basically have 360-degree vision so you can see the things that are behind you moving based on the pins on your skin. So it's, just the input doesn't matter. Your brain's integrating it seamlessly after a while, after it's automatized this. And
so how do we start to be able to tap into these like it just sounds like abilities that we have that are sort of suppressed and we don't use, like, or are we using it subconsciously and we don't really realize it, or like, but to me it feels like, God, we should be using all.
I mean, we're using it. It's just, you're just kind of finding a new use for those
so
things.
how do
that
you
your brain's
tap into
already
the
doing.
awareness of that is happening around you, or do you even
might
need
be
to?
using a lot of these things just to a lesser degree. So as long as your brain is able to achieve what it needs to, which is, probably in my case, just feeding my face with stuff and sleeping.
Some donuts
right?
and making fun of your dog.
Yeah. So as long as it can do that, it doesn't need the other strategy, because there's really amazing technology that probably gets in the way of learning how to use that kind of tactile sense of the world or auditory sense of the world, because there are these glasses, these smart, I don't know, smart glasses might not
The
be
ones that make
right
people
thing.
see color.
But there's glasses where you can put them on and it knows what you're looking at, and it will use AI to identify that, that's a chessboard and that's a box of tissues, and it will name the things for you in your environment, and you can, it will tell you how far the thing is away, so you can start to understand your visual space. But it's spoon feeding a lot of those things to you. So if you don't have to do it, your brain doesn't go through the plasticity.
Oh, okay.
So I think,
like I always think of when somebody's.
I think while they say you only use 30% of your brain, that's kind of like a mistake to think that 70% is always turned off. It's that the 30% that's used at any one time just keeps on rotating, right?
Right.
So as long as the thing's in use, it's hard to repurpose it. But when, like, for an example, if you lose a body part, like a limb, the representation of that space in your brain where it's taking for both motor and for somatosensory input, that gets taken over by the other areas near it. So you don't have a dead space. So as long as the space is used, there's no need for the plasticity. But the second something's not being used, now I think you're more adaptable and more able to kind of learn the other techniques.
Right. So when someone's blind, it's like they get better hearing. When they're deaf, they get a little bit better at seeing. I don't know. Like, it seems like it cranks up.
They might hear the same, but how they use that,
how they focus
better.
their consciousness on it.
Yeah. And how the brain interprets the world using that will change.
It'd be cool if we could all like use everything we got to the max. You know what I mean? Like you could concentrate enough to get everything to work the way it's at its optimum. Like if you could had super you had the hearing of a blind person, or, you know what I'm saying? You had that as a regular dude, plus you have whatever. Do any of the other senses get cranked up? Sense of feeling, probably, and touch probably gets cranked up when you.
There was a guy in our community, Quentin. I don't know if you remember him, but he was raised by 2 blind people.
Oh, really?
So when he was doing his stand-up, he took the class when he was doing his 5-minute story. He was talking about being raised by 2, and Eric Trundy and I were teaching that class simultaneously, and we just stopped him. He's like, I grew up just like everybody else in this small town. My mom and dad were blind, and he goes to keep on going, and we're like, stop.
Whoa,
stop,
yeah,
stop,
you have to cover that.
You don't even need to go to the end. We got your first 5 minutes.
That's right. If you don't have a hide and seek joke coming up right now, then you can get out of the business.
And he was talking about, and I don't remember who asked, but somebody said, you must have gotten away with everything. And he's like, no, I got away with nothing. And he's like, you try to get away with anything as a teenager with 2 parents that can hear anything in the house and smell anything in the house. So he couldn't sneak anything in his room silently, even, because they would smell it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I don't know if I would want to increase. My wife had the increased smell thing when she was pregnant, and it was like, that would just drive me crazy, the way she was with smells.
Yeah, I think what you want is always just middle of the road for all of that.
Not enough good smells out there, I think.
Yeah.
That one.
I saw a guy the other day that had an antenna on his head so he could see colors.
Huh.
Part of me didn't.
Colors?
Yeah, so he was colorblind, but then he had this antenna in his head, and so it vibrates something in him where he can if he looks at a blue couch, he can tell that it's blue or whatever. But part of me was just like, I don't know if I'll believe it. It's weird how there's these big advancements, but I'm just like, I don't know.
I've seen videos of people. There's a set of sunglasses that people order for the.
Oh, right.
Have you seen those where they
I
give
saw
them?
a video where somebody put it on.
It makes you cry how happy they are. I wouldn't. You never think that would make somebody that happy to see colors. I guess because I do, so I don't really appreciate that.
Yeah. So
that's such a.
But do you remember that when you first? How bad were your eyes before you actually said, "All right, I'm going to get glasses"?
I didn't know. I don't know. Probably worse than they. Because what happened for me was I was in a green room, and the guy that was hosting the show was older or whatever, and there was a pair of glasses there, and when he was on stage, I of course do what you do. You pick them up and you put them on, and man, this guy can't see at all. I looked through there and I was like, this guy's blind. And then I looked down at some words on a newspaper, and I was like, holy shit.
So that's it, I think.
That was the moment where I realized, oh, wow, I need glasses.
Yeah, so I think it's the same thing. You get this moment of, I didn't realize the world was that way, and all that happens at one time. Because when I got glasses, I had, so these are just readers now, but for a long time I wore glasses so that I could see things far away because the world was
But you're not
blurry.
reading. Why are you wearing them?
Because I don't have
That looks cooler than what I'm doing, but up and down with my little...
I got tired of carrying them around and then not having them, and I don't always have my kids to say, "Hey, what's this say?"
Yeah.
Right? That's inappropriate for a business meeting. So I just leave. These are just
Could be your comfort kid. You bring them with you everywhere you go.
That's right. Just put them in a vest.
That's right. You bring them on planes. You know what I'm saying? You need them in a meeting. You're like, hey, what's this? That's great.
But I remember when I was 10 and got glasses for the first time. And I don't know what was in my head exactly, other than thinking that I guess you grow up to be able to see things far away. Because my dad could see stuff, my brother could see stuff.
You always needed them. You just didn't realize.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I remember putting them on for the first time, and I was on the street just naming stuff that I could see, and my mom was laughing hysterically at me. I was like, "There's words on that sign."
You didn't know that before? That's hilarious.
Because I knew there was a sign, but I couldn't even see the words.
That's way better than my glasses. So I got my glasses in Sam's Club, and I looked up, and Ice Age was playing on all the big TVs, and I was just like, "Whoa, Scrat looks great." It's so lame.
Maybe you just hadn't had an HD television.
Maybe, I don't know. We did not.
Yeah.
Did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, it was the leaves on the trees and the grass just blew my mind. Yeah.
Oh, that's another thing. I didn't know, I didn't know, like, from a distance, it looks like a poorly drawn cartoon of a tree when you can't see. It just looks like there's a green circle top to a tree kind of thing.
Yeah.
Don't you wish every day you could walk out and have that sort of appreciation for what is? You know what I mean? Like you walk by the same tree every day, but they're
Acid and mushrooms.
yeah, that's what changes it.
You can do that every day.
Yeah.
I do love that idea. For a while, I was challenging myself to take a picture of something that I thought was beautiful every day.
Right.
So
cool.
and so on a walk, I'd see like a raindrop on a leaf, and I'd be like, I'm gonna take a picture of that because that looks cool to me. And so I was trying to find a moment of beauty every day for that very reason. Because I think as humans, we set our bar for what represents a crappy day very low, and what represents a really good day very high.
Yeah.
And so you have far more crappy days because you don't find those other. So I think you got to have an equally low happy day bar to kind of say, yeah, I saw some cool stuff today, and this and this happened, and they were all positive things, and then a bunch of neutral stuff. That should actually, qualify as a good day.
That's why I like little kids, because they're basically on like psychedelics all the time. So you have an idea of like, oh, this is gonna be neat. I'm gonna show them this park or whatever or this thing. But on the walk, they just see the way the light's coming off of some window, and they're mesmerized. And you're like, oh wait, okay. If you're paying attention, like, okay, this is.
Which is
So
why
can you achieve hallucinogenic kind of not ability, but can you start to change your consciousness so that you sort of start to see the world without those things? Can you?
For me, that was always the goal. Was like, okay, I want to be like the person I am on mushrooms like all the time. And a lot of that is just, being like present and feeling connected to things. And when you're just like, appreciating how beautiful little things around you are, I feel like you're getting close to that.
So does studying the mind help you do that or over time, or does it help you to, I don't know, to give you faith that you can do it? You know what I mean? That you can.
Psychology has not helped me with that, I don't think.
It hasn't? Like,
No.
All right.
Different, that's been that's been fascinating for other reasons, but I don't know. I don't know that I ever connected it that much to those interests.
They do it. They have interesting things to say about psychology and psychiatrists too in this, because it's totally, almost the entire field is based on the biases and ideas of the psychiatrist and the psychologist.
Oh, yeah.
So the rates of them being able to, the most professional in the business, the rates of them being able to diagnose the same thing of a specific patient are terrible.
Yeah.
So it's about who you pick, and that's crazy how bad that science is.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to how many variables you have just in what you're trying to observe, let alone the noise and the bias that people have. And there are
how does that field stay afloat? It's like, it seems like it's getting more and more where people are going more and more to therapy and more to get diagnosed because for their mental health, and the chances of there being a consensus on what you have are fucking minuscule.
Even if that person doesn't know what they're doing, there are huge benefits just talking about your problems.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I think this might go back to kind of not only that benefit, but also you might not hit the bullseye, but you might get a 19 when you hit the board, right? Yeah. So it might not be the exact right thing. If I go in and I'm sad and I get a diagnosis of schizophrenia, then I miss the board completely. But you're directionally in the right area.
Okay.
And so I think that might be the difference between like a perfect and a non-optimal. And so I think. And
then it's like medicine, you can start to see what's working.
And you're going to have people, you're going to have, just like you have bad doctors and you have bad welders and you have bad everything.
But even the good ones don't make the same decisions. They don't make the same recommendations. They don't make the same diagnosis.
Correct. So like schizophrenia is a tough one to like fully diagnose and then treat, because the clinical trials depend on like, did anybody get better? And it's really tough to generate that. And there's,
you can't judge that by general, like the general peace that someone has in their life, or the general like happiness levels and stuff like that.
It's super
change.
complex, because even day to day or even hour by hour, you're going to get variability in that person. So it is difficult to measure, but there are.
And then you just have to take the crazy person's word for it that they're getting better.
Well, no, there are tests now, but it is hard to make that objective and not arbitrary. And so like there's a physician at Duke that created at least what was, but I think is the gold standard for that. And it's not only it's looking at a lot of different dimensions simultaneously, but it's meant to try to make put some objectivity around that. So like there'll be like a 3D box that they have to generate, and the ideal is that they are able to generate it, but it's looking at what's the strategy of doing it. Like, are they doing it in smooth motions, or do they have a strategy? Also, how much time it is. So
right.
they're trying to boil down all of the various variables into things that can be observed, and it's just challenging for a lot of the kind of in the area of mental health.
How would you guys recommend improving judgment? Like if you were just telling just people in general, like what are some things I could do, some basic tools I could have as a layman to make sure I'm improving my judgment of things?
That's a big question.
It is a good question.
You know what I mean? There should be like 3 or 4 things you're like, hey, if you got a big decision coming, the math is you're probably not going to make the best decision because you're going to be biased, you're going to have noise. So here's 4 things that you can sort of look to do.
I mean, I don't think to me, this is just asking Steve, it's not science, it's just my experience and things that I try to do. Cause I try to separate wants. It's very like if I have to buy a car, it's very easy for me to like pick the car that I want and then justify how that makes the most sense.
So how do we protect ourselves? Like, what are some things we do that make us go, okay,
it's a little bit of like the kind of, I don't necessarily create a spreadsheet, but I do try to boil it down to what is it that I really need and measure those parameters. I also will, I was going to say role play, but that's not the right exact thing. It sounds weird and kinky. Right. But I'll imagine myself having made, if it's a binary, it's easy, right? So like when I was thinking about those 2 jobs, I was trying to say, I try to fool myself to say, all right, I've chosen this job, how do I feel? And I've chosen that job, how do I feel? What's making me nervous about that job versus what's making me nervous about the other one? So I try to kind of anticipate which choice is going to make me feel comfort and those sorts of things. But that's also highly flawed. But at the same time, because I remember making some pretty difficult choices in my life, and after going through them, feeling just this relief, and that relief kind of helped solidify that I made the right choice. I wasn't like, oh no, I gotta undo that choice. So I try to simulate that, but but I also know that it's not, it's not a perfect system. I also try to make sure that I'm, don't beat myself up about decisions. Try to remind myself that most decisions are things that aren't end of the world things, right? So jobs, for example, I tell like.
So really, it's just about learning how to live with your decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Right. Well, my daughter was very upset about, like, she perceived that all of her friends knew what they wanted to do with their life in high school, and she was having a rough time. She's like, I don't know what I want to do. I was like, that's good. Like, I think you would be weird if you did. Like,
first of all, we make some of our worst decisions from like 16 to 25, especially males.
Yeah, for sure.
So why are you deciding what you're going to do with the rest of your life in the time when you're making the worst decisions of your life.
Yeah. So all you can do is make your best possible decision,
That's what
knowing
I'm
that
saying.
it's suboptimal, and then adjust.
So
And so I think that's the real lesson that I learned over time, is to
Yeah.
evaluate where I am on the other side of a decision and try to be objective about that,
okay.
which is, I think, why I quit my job after a few months. It's like, oh, whoops.
Yeah, I like that. I think if I want to make a good decision, I'm going to gather a lot of information,
Right.
and I do it in a way, gather good information, and also seek out information that is going to disagree.
I was just
that
gonna
has the
say that.
potential.
That's funny.
It
You're
has
one
the
of the people he
potential-
calls.
yeah.
You're one of the people he calls with high mental ability,
Yeah,
and that's because people that can be classified as that are people that are going to look at the opposite side from what they think.
right. Make sure you're getting the opposite side potentially.
So be a contrarian to yourself, even.
Yeah, and be a contrarian to what you first see too. Don't just go with the first thing.
Okay.
Look it up. What's good? Oh, this is saying this is good. Well, let me seek out information that might tell me that it's not good. And then you need to be open, just open to the evidence. I like to leverage the wisdom of crowds too. For like anything, I like reviews.
It's
I like-
interesting how quickly a review can.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this with the George Carlin AI special that got released,
Right.
and relating again to this book where it talks about the way music becomes popular. Like if early on it gets like a lot of good feedback, it will take off,
Right.
and or it'll get squashed. But eventually the quality will rise. But I was thinking that with that, like if Kelly Carlin had come out and been like, "This is great,"
Right.
you know, like there would be a totally different mood in the coverage of it and the people
Totally.
going to watch it. It's
Yeah.
it's interesting how quickly it can go the other way with just one voice being like, "This is not good." Whereas like when I
They should have
first heard
worked
about
with
it,
the Carlin family from the beginning.
yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, you'd think they would. You can consult AI in your decision making there. But
Yeah.
anyway, so it's like the early decision has a lot of influence.
Right. Totally. But yeah, I like reviews if it's a lot of reviews and I can see, okay, there's like a consensus. I like Reddit because it's very democratic. And if you get like a popular thread about something and you can see what's been upvoted,
Okay.
that is nice. But yeah, I mean, some review, I'm not going to trust a 5-star review if it's like 8 people.
It's interesting though. It's when I'm just thinking this now, like where the wisdom of crowds, right, or whatever the wisdom of is generally accepted, like you're saying, is the best one. But it seems like I have this stereotype in my head that through history, the majority has been wrong most of the time about like big issues, about going to war or going to things like. Somehow the majority is the majority's wrong, and then science comes around and says no, it's this, and then it slowly switches to that. So that sort of does that conflict with the theory of the wisdom of crowds at all? That the masses are normally wrong.
Well, I don't know. I think the difference is saying normally wrong versus can be wrong.
And normally
Right.
maybe just be my own bias too. That they're-
Because like the idea of going to war, you get, like a,
that's bias too. You're right. That is at
Yeah.
the time.
but like science, for example, where people thought this for the longest time, and then more was understood, and that evolves over time.
We generally fight against that. Like so many of those people, as like Stuart Huff talks about, were killed and murdered because they were like, no, this is different. Oxygen is a thing, or we should wash our hands to stop germ. Like all of science was like, fuck you. So once again, I get nowhere. I just kind of wander around. That's how this. So, am I describing when I'm asking these questions what the impression you got of the book by reading the reviews of it when you just went, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't give you a lot of he seems to be talking more about structural answers and how to in decision making, less for individuals and more for systems and for like you're talking about, like with having the whole group lay out a plan for separating out who's making the decisions to eliminate all that noise and stuff. But it's not so much on an individual basis. And this book had me I invented an idea for a product.
Really?
Yeah, because my son's a baseball player, right?
Yeah.
And you know how they're going to. Are you a fan of sports at all?
Yeah.
So I noticed when I was watching some of the Australian Open after they're wearing they're wearing regular watches. Anyway, they're going to PitchCom now, where where the coach calls the pitch, and they have it either in their hat or in their thing, so they're already wiring in the things, right? Mm-hmm. Why not just have them have either with PitchCom or with a watch? They do it that way. They just signal it into the first baseman, the shortstop, everybody that needs to know the pitch, instead of having the players with the cards in their hands even the quarterbacks out there with the flip up thing. Why not just have a little screen that they look at that they just put it into? And then I was thinking that with the baseball, with the pitchers and catchers and algorithms. And also, like pitchers right now, like when you go to a training facility, they have like these, what's it called? The TrackMan systems, where it's judging the spin rate of the ball, the release point, the velocity, all these things, how much it breaks, blah, blah, blah. And when the pitchers are in there doing their bullpens, they immediately look back at the screen, see what their numbers are, and then make their adjustments.
Yeah.
To have that, they have TrackMans in the stadiums. They have the thing. Why not sort of connect them so the pitchers can then make their adjustments on the fly? They can look at those same numbers, or even have like a coach chat GPT that knows all that batter stats, all the math on what count, which thing. And so all that is happening in real time, and then that's basically calling the game.
I bet some of them are already doing that.
Most coaches will not. Most coaches probably are going to be like, just like everybody, coaches are going to be like,
but same I'm sure resistance. There's a nerdy math guy.
Yes, until there's a nerdy math guy that's running things, just like in Moneyball, but more individualized to the teams, where maybe that it goes through, it calls the pitch based on all the fucking math, and then the coach can either overrule or do it and send it in. But all those numbers should be accessible, except through some. Now they got these weird walkie-talkie systems that sort of work and don't work.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, I don't know what I would need to do to put that together, but I love the idea. You have to
give the same advantage to the batter to say, like, here are the stats, and most likely here's where your weaknesses are, here's where their strengths are. So, because otherwise, batting averages would go down.
But they already have access to that. The batter, they already, once you watch a major league game, they go into the dugout between innings. Or even after an at bat, they're in there. Funny. It's after, right?
Then
so
the pitcher's AI is going to be like the batter's AI is going to tell him that this is
I
was, the pitch.
I was kind of thinking about that. There's like optimal play for poker, right? And like you can, if someone is optimal play, there are exploits against that optimal play. Right. And there are things you can do where you have this like game within a game kind of thing.
Because if you're the coach on the other bench, you're going through the same algorithm. Like, he's the best pitch here is a slider down and in.
And so now
I'd be looking for that.
Now you're expecting it.
Yeah. But now don't do that pitch.
Yeah.
Because they're expecting it.
Yeah.
So you get into this meta world, I think, real quick in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I mean is, I think the first sort of, just like at Wake Forest, in their baseball team, maybe 10, 15 years ago, they built a pitcher's lab, which was all that stuff, all that technology on the best way to do pitching. And they have vaulted. They're one of the best schools to go to as a pitcher now, you know? Mm-hmm. I just think the first couple organizations that start to implement that are going to have a huge advantage for a little while until that happens, until they catch up to be like, this is the pitch that's coming, if they're using this system too, you know?
Well, there's so much that you can do to to optimize your throw for speed and movement and like when I pitched, it was just you throw it and it's like, well, that seemed pretty good.
Yeah, that moved pretty good. That went kind of where I wanted it to. But then Greg Maddux wasn't better than her, but what he did was he watched film and figured out, if I put that pitch right there, the farthest he's going to hit it is the deep right.
Yeah.
Or that guy's 9 times out of 10 he grounds out when the ball's right there. He wasn't like, I'm just going to overpower my pitchers. He did the film work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he did that. So he was just ahead of the game on that. So it's that. I'm thinking my son doesn't throw 95, so I'm trying to think of ways for him to do better. You know. Like football players with the like, why not just have an iWatch where he looks down and he doesn't have to go through looking it up. It's just right there, you know?
Yeah,
I
don't know.
It seems like it's coming and they just haven't
I
figured
mean, they're
out.
getting the play called in, and then he's going from that to what he's reading off. And I don't know if it's just because it's easier to go through the long play that way versus seeing it on a small screen.
I'm sure it saves time for me to go like, okay, A7, and then you look down and you're like, okay, A7 is split right, fucking blah blah blah, 7 words I don't know, on 3, so whatever. So
I can't even fake that anymore. I used to, back when I was a kid, I could do something that I thought was real, but it ain't real.
Have you heard of the Halpern critical thinking assessment?
No.
Okay. All right. Well.
You're skipping a lot of the.
Well,
book.
I am. I don't really. I
I
thought I'd be able to just. I have it all marked up and underlined and stuff like that. I just got to tell you, this kind of stuff to me is very interesting, and I don't really retain a lot of it. But it's also like homework reading it.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, it's like I'll listen to a book on Audible again and again because it's homework, because I don't have notes in front of me and that sort of thing, and there's a lot of meaty stuff out there to try to take in.
But are there books that you're like, oh, I can't wait for whatever Dan Ariely's new book to come out so I can read about his studies on human decision making? Do you have that in your life, or do you, or whatever, like whatever that brain thing is? Is it all like really sort of heavy stuff, or is there?
It's not all heavy stuff.
Is there a brains for dummies?
There's certainly, like, I think like Blink is one where it talks about how you consume the world, which is probably kind of like a lighter version of slow thinking and long thinking.
There's a lot of social psychology in that. Yeah.
Does your social psychology help you with crowds in comedy?
It might. Yeah. It might in ways I'm not really thinking about. It probably does.
Huh. Does it bleed into you? For both of you, does it just bleed into everyday thinking as you're all the stuff you've learned about how the mind's working? Do you catch yourself and be like, oh, that's just my mind doing that? That's not really.
So that has happened. I'm trying to think of an example, but more often it is more that I think, like at my core, problem solving and analytical. And so it's just, I see a problem and I try to figure out how to get to the solution every day. So it's not necessarily like neuro that's helping me. It's just kind of like, I think I was born a scientist.
Just the general approach, yeah.
Okay.
So it's not really the content, because like what you learn as far as helping you change behavior is just that. It's not an exact recipe. It's just a kind of like guidance. So anytime you have a new problem, like that, my favorite jobs are ones where it's a new problem. It's probably also why I like comedy, because every time you're writing something new, it's like, all right, how do I make this work? And then you got to figure out how to make that thing work. And some of the most satisfying things are the ones that don't work at first. Mm-hmm. And then you find that way to connect it or to make it work finally. And you're like, yeah, feels so good.
Yes, it does.
Like honestly, and I'll tell some of those things on stage because it was satisfying. The writing process was satisfying for me. Even though I opened mic some stuff because I was trying to get some stuff out, and when it finally snapped, it felt so good. I was like, I got to go tell people about this. Go share it.
Are there laymen that read this kind of stuff, or is it mostly? Okay.
I think so.
That's who it's for, I think, when you get to the book stage. I don't read books, but I'm familiar with this stuff because I'm reading the journal.
What do you read? White papers and articles and
peer-reviewed journal articles.
God, that's got to even be more hard to read than a guy trying to write for the layman.
I mean, it's the language I'm used to now.
What are you excited about in what you're doing?
I'm very interested in this how AI thinks problem. and a lot of people are interested in this. I just had lunch with a new professor in the computer science department, and I didn't even know how much they don't know. He's like,
Do they don't know apparently as much as we don't know, because we don't
Pretty
even know
much.
how we're just getting to decisions.
they see what's going in, they see what's coming out, but they don't know what it's doing. They don't know how it's arriving at this output. So they're coming to us because, like, well, you've been studying the brain. This is another brain. We need to understand what it's doing. So help us understand what's happening here.
And do you when you kind of look at that, do you see the differences or the sameness?
It's looking similar in a lot of ways, I think, but
But that could be how you're looking at it.
At a guess, I'm going to say similar is the perfect word to use, EJ, versus same.
right.
Yeah.
Well, it can't be the same.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess it could if we program, because we don't even know how the human brain works. So how can we program a brain to work
Yeah,
like a human? You know,
Back when I was in grad school, a buddy of mine was studying. He was kind of doing. He started to do a little bit more kind of math. He was taking what we knew about ion channels and creating models that would predict and generate these models so that it could replicate what is observed, kind of going the other way. Part of the justification for his grants were like, if you could do this on a large scale for understanding, his was like the first, like some of the first steps. But if you could understand how that works, then you could kind of work from bottoms up to how the mind works. But it just seems like we're centuries away from that.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
because like he was just trying to say, here's how channels work in a cell to generate an action potential, which it's easily measured and you can model it, but it's difficult to do things from that bottoms up kind of method.
Okay.
But if you ask him, I think he would say that, hopefully you have the top down and the bottoms up and you meet in the middle somewhere for a better understanding of how that actually happens.
Okay. How much of the understanding of the mind has changed in your years of being around it?
I think even in grad school,
So what he's teaching is whatever, a bunch of light years ahead of where you guys were when you were learning.
Well, tough for me. So I don't know where because like our fields are related but different. So I don't know where your field was, and like I graduated, I got my PhD in '98, so 25 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Don't know how much has changed, but I imagine it's a lot. But same thing for the neurobiology, right? So there's far better techniques, and there's so much like.
How much of what you were learning is no longer even valid?
So, there's a lot of what I learned that are still, like, I wouldn't necessarily say there's things that are invalid, because it wasn't like when I was, or at least not yet. Like, I can't think of anything that I'm aware of that, like, they showed that's not at all how it works, right? So early on, when they could record action potentials, they had hypotheses of how that worked, and they would guess, it was like a pump that would move, that actively move charges across the membrane, and then they realized that it was ion channels, which is a different mechanism, right? And so there was a kind of a revolution of understanding of how that changed. So
how many times were you guys all like, this changes everything, and then 3 years later it didn't? I guess that happens.
Well,
for every field.
that phenomenon where you think you have this great idea and then you test it and it turns out to be nothing. That happens far more frequently than.
It's common. Yeah, people get excited about an idea and then you realize it was way overstated or we got too excited and you pull back a little bit. But yeah, that's pretty normal.
All right.
Because you start to see some things. Like I remember after a few beers and at a happy hour, my old boss and I were talking, and there was some kind of news about this protein called leptin, which was going to solve obesity in humans.
How'd that work out?
And that gene, it's done. Done. It's solved. I'm really good at it. And we were just kind of doing these thought experiments, and we found these relationships between one of the things that we were studying and how it works in the hypothalamus. And we're like, oh, maybe this thing has this purpose over here, but it's actually doing like appetite suppression. And they started studying this for ALS patients because of other reasons. And they had to stop that clinical trial because patients were dying, and the reason they were dying is that patients were losing too much weight and they weren't able to. So they ended that, but they were like, "Huh, that's an interesting side effect." That if we
Death.
Eating less.
Okay.
If we dose it very differently, can we make it safe within this dose? But turned out to not work. But it was kind of like this, and we figured it out. And then when the studies came out, we knew it. We high-fived each other, and then it didn't really work out that well.
So I don't hate to be laughing at your failure.